up to class 9 already. And now we're going to be speaking about the timing of Qeriat Shema. Tonight we'll specifically focus on when nightfall is. When can the time of Qeriat Shema, when does the time of Qeriat Shema actually start at night? We're going to dive into this quite deeply. While it seems so simple that nightfall is simply when it's dark outside, it's not. At which point of the sun setting does it actually become night? When I no longer see the sun, but it's still light. You still see the light from the sun shining throughout the sky. So at which point within the darkness of the night is it legally, from a Jewish standpoint, considered night? And then I would be able to start to fulfill my obligation of Qeriat Shema. That's our topic for tonight. So let's start with Harambam in Mishneh Torah. Now the 9th halakha, 9th class, 9th halakha. Ezehu zeman Qeriat Shema balayla. When is the time for Qeriat Shema at night? Mitzvata mishe'at yitziat hakochavim. The time is when, not from sunset, which would have been articulated as shekiat hama, the setting of the sun, but rather from yitziat hakochavim, when the stars come out. Do stars actually emerge? Are they missing during the day and thereby come out at night? We all know that that's not the case. What happens is there's a certain degree of darkness which thereby allows us to see the stars without what we now call light pollution. And from that time, a person can continue saying Qeriat Shema ad hasi halayla, till the middle of the night. But if a person transgressed, the avar is to go over, to overstep the line, which is literally in English to transgress, to overstep. Ve'iher, and you delayed it. Ve'karat shelo ala amud hashahar, and you read until just before you start seeing the light of the sun. You fulfilled your obligation if you read that late. But that's not the proper time to read. And in order to distance you from making an error, the error being missing Qeriat Shema, the rabbi said, make sure that you say Qeriat Shema before the middle of the night. Because what happens if we delay? Honestly, we fall asleep, right? If you come home and say, you know what, I'm hungry. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to eat my meal. I'm tired. I had a long day. I'm just going to relax in front of the TV for a little bit. I'll just close my eyes for 5 minutes. Next thing you know, you are out and you're sleeping. That's why the Gemara in Berachot, early on in the first chapter, states that when a person comes home, they need to say arbit right away. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is they're going to fall asleep and they're not going to actually say it. Next thing they know, they're waking up in the morning. And Harambam here does not say to distance a person from transgression. He says pishia. Pishia is a almost purposeful violation, right? Very strong language. Why? Because a person was being lazy. A person was actively doing something else as opposed to making sure that he was saying Qeriat Shema. So very, very clear here. Qeriat Shema starts Set HaKochavim, when you can see the 3 stars at night, and it goes until the middle of the night. But if you delayed, although it's not good, you read Qeriat Shema, you recited Qeriat Shema, you fulfilled your obligation, but that's not what we want you to do. We want you to say Qeriat Shema when you go home, or you're not going home till much later, the time of Set HaKochavim, or right around that. Now, there are other questions that arise, right? We right now currently say Qeriat Shema in Beit Knesset, if you go to Beit Knesset to say Mincha, quite early, right? The sun had just set Let's say right now at KJ, we said we start Minha at 4:55, which is very late, right before Qeriat Hama, just a couple of minutes before. We're really just catching the Minha. So we go into Arbit after Qeriat, but it's only a couple of minutes after, right? If you're talking about 5:05, you probably finish everything. I'm probably back in my office upstairs by 5:10. It's still light outside for the most part. It's still pretty light out, right? It's definitely not Seta Kochavim. So what the halakha there is, even though I fulfilled my obligation for the tefillah, the amidah of arbit, of saying it in shul, Qeriat Shema, I did not fulfill my obligation because I said it before Seta Kochavim. And thereby, when I go back home, I have to actually say Qeriat Shema again, post this time of Seta Kochavim. Okay? We're going to understand what this time of Seta Kochavim is. I brought the next source here just to show you the lack of clarity that we had just from the Pesukim. When the Pesukim tell us when to say Qeriat Shema, Ubshoch Becha Ubkumecha, when we lay down and when we get up, it does not identify the time. Here in the Talmud Bavli, at what time does a person begin to say Qeriat Shema at nighttime? Now it's interesting. It's going to give us simanim. They don't have digital clocks like we have, analog time. They don't have clocks at all. What they did have were sundials. But a sundial, as its name, functions based on the sun. At night, you don't have that functionality. So how do you know when it is actually time for arbit? So it's interesting here, before what we have, which is going to be the punchline, which you already know, they give us simanim, signs, symbols. What's going to be that's going to trigger, that's going to signal that the time has actually come. I should say trigger, but the signal. When people in general go on Friday night to sit and have their bread. Sorry, that's, yeah. That's Rabbi Meir. Hachamim state, no. But no, the rabbis argue, and they say, no, you know what the time really is? The time is from when the Kohanim merit to eat of the terumah. What do you mean to merit? To eat the terumah. So this is an individual who was impure. He went to the mikveh for ritual immersion, and then has to wait for nightfall. Not Qeriat Hama, when the sun is setting, when it's below the horizon, but the time when it actually becomes dark. When the light of the sun is wiped out from the sky. And how do we know that has happened? Siman ledavar, a symbol for this, signal for that. Set hakochavim. When you're able to notice 3 stars in the sky, you know that the light pollution is gone enough that it's now officially nighttime. Here is how Harambam describes it within the laws of Shabbat, because this gets into when Shabbat ends. And I am going to differentiate what you're going to see in this halakha, the end of Shabbat and the beginning of Shabbat. Because the beginning of the Shabbat is going to be before the sun actually sets, because we are going to be stringent to ensure that we do not violate the Shabbat. Why? Because when exactly is the time of shift between day to night? It's very unclear. We have signals for it, but it's not exacting. And we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're going to violate the Shabbat. So talking about when Shabbat's going to start, we're going to say we are going to stop doing melachot, doing those things which are forbidden on Shabbat, from before the sun sets. But when we're talking about after Shabbat, we're going to go to the opposite end of that, to post when we know for sure that it's actually night and that thereby the day is completely over. So on the first end of Shabbat, we're going to stop doing our melachot for sure before the day is over and it shifts into night, so before the sun has set. But after, we're going to ensure and make sure that the day has completely ended, and we're going to wait till we have a sign of Set HaKochavim. Now, there's another debate that you should know. The question is, now is the word the trigger. What is the trigger? Is the trigger for the end of day the Set HaKochavim, the 3 stars? Or is there actually a certain time factor? And the 3 stars are only a symbol or a signal that that time factor has actually shifted and gone by. That's a major variance that we have within the United States of America, for example, and all throughout the world. We're not trying to understand when Shabbat ends. Because here in the United States, if you would look at the fixed time the Harambam gives for when Set HaKochavim is, and we'll see that in a bit, he says it's 20 minutes. 20 minutes. So if you look tomorrow, you could do a test of it, see what time sunset is. I think it's somewhere around 4:58, something to that effect. Count 20 minutes after that, clock minutes, and see if it's yet dark outside. It's still very, very much light. You're not going to see it being dark till much later, maybe more into the 30 plus minutes. And so many rabbis were uncomfortable with ending Shabbat at 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and the time span moved much, much later. Because they said it cannot be that we're ending Shabbat, but yet we still see so much light. And it's impossible to see 3 stars. Even though it's the case, the Harambam and the Geonim, those rabbis post the Talmudic period, articulated that Shabbat ends about 20 minutes after sunset. They said no, but the symbol, the signal, is Set HaKochavim. So it must have meant that only within Eretz Yisrael, the lands that they were speaking about, that it was 20 minutes. Because that's when you would have the congruence of the 20 minutes and the 3 stars being visible. But in another location where there's not a congruence between the time and the signal or the symbol, then you have to shift the time to match when the signal would actually be. And so that's how we really shifted to be much later with our times for Shabbat. In KJ Sephardic, we end Shabbat at 35 fixed minutes, which leads to another complexity, which we're not going to delve into, but I'll share it so you have awareness of. Everything I've said now is about fixed time. There's another opinion that it's not based on fixed time, but rather based on astronomical time. And that's a whole different conversation. That's actually how KJ figures out the end of Shabbat. They use astronomical time. And so that's going to change. If you look at how many minutes post Shabbat, KJ is ending Shabbat versus KJ Sephardic, which is always going to be 35 minutes for ending of Shabbat. For other things, we actually do keep 20 minutes when talking about, let's say, a fast day, anything that's dirabanan, right, where we're not looking to be extra mahmir, we'll follow the 20 minutes. But if it's going to be Shabbat or Yom Kippur, then we're going to be following the 35 minutes. So let's look at Harambam here in Ilchot Shabbat, and you're going to see a little of this that I elaborated on about being extra stringent when it comes to Shabbat to guarantee that I am not doing any melacha on Shabbat itself. Here's a new factor. Harambam's obviously quoting from the Talmud. From when the sun sets, until you see 3 stars. Oh, what kind of stars, right? If you looked outside, you see different size stars. So specifically, kochavim benoniim, medium-sized stars. Not the really small little ones, which you need a lot of light for because they don't shine forth so much light. And not the huge ones that are so easy to see, but the medium ones. And when you could see them, when enough of the light has dissipated to allow for you to see them, for the light of the stars to shine through, that is a time hanikra ben hashemashot. So that's not even right, exactly right. So from the time that the sun sets until the time that you see these medium stars, that time period in between is called between the luminaries, because you have the sun as one luminary and you have the moon as another luminary. So you have this in-between twilight zone, right, between day and night, and we're not exactly sure when that shift of time is going to happen from sunset to actual night. Right? And this is debated from much, much early on, from the Tanaim and Muraim all the way through. Vehu safek min hayom, safek min halayla. As I said, you're not sure. Is it daytime? Is it nighttime? V'danin bo lehahmir bechol makom. And since it's Shabbat, we're going to be mahmir. But not just Shabbat. He says bechol makom. In any place where a being mahmir is appropriate, we are going to be mahmir. And whichever way this goes, right? Whether being mahmir is going more towards the day, or whether mahmir is going more towards the night. Right? And that's why once sunset happened, even though it's not seta kochavim, vaday layla as we call it, absolute for sure nighttime, we're most definitely not going to be lighting Nerot Shabbat. Right? We actually light Nerot Shabbat. We make sure to light it extra early. But it's important to note, by the way, candle lighting time is not the time of Ben HaShemashot. Right? Ben HaShemashot, which we call between the luminaries, specifically starts from sunset. The candle lighting time that's announced is either 18 minutes or 20 minutes before sunset. Right, the time we're talking about now is post-sunset. And the key factor, when is it going to be absolute night? We know for sure when we see that there are 3 medium stars in the sky. There you go. You definitely have this time span from the sun setting until you actually have nightfall. And even if the sun set, even after that, in certain scenarios, for one star, they're going to consider it still day. Where does that come from? So this comes from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, from the book of Nehemiah. And there you have a statement that they were working all day. And what's all day that they're working? They don't describe it as an 8-hour workday, a 10-hour workday, a 12-hour workday. They describe it as me'alot hashahar ad set hakochavim. They describe it as from the rising of the sun until the stars actually come out. Okay, so that's when nightfall actually is. Right? But I mentioned before that it's a time span, right? So there's a time span between the sunset and the time when you could actually see the 3 stars, right? So how much time is that? So this was an experience I had earlier today when I was working within Sefaria text, and I knew that the text here had my answer, but the Sefaria text completely missed the important phrase. And so I'm just bringing both of those to you through multiple of our classes. We've spoken about the importance of using manuscripts. And here's one of those examples. So here, I'm going to point to it here, looking at the left side. Ena temeim ochlim bateruma. Those who are impure, as we mentioned before, the kohanim, who need to go to the mikveh, ad shiaribu shimshan, right? So they have to go to the mikveh, and they have to wait until it's going to be sunset. V'yetzu shilosha kochavim benoniim, and the 3 stars are going to be able to be seen. Right? This is the source that we've seen earlier. And this is actually the base from the first Mishnah in Masechet Berachot, which starts Me'emmatai Qeriat Shema be'arvin, misha'a she'akohanim nichnasim le'echol betrumatan. When do the Kohanim begin to, Me'emmatai Qeriat Shema be'arvin, when can we begin to say Qeriat Shema at nighttime? Misha'a she'akohanim nichnasim le'echol betrumatan. From the time that the Kohanim can begin to eat their terumah. So when is that time? That time, as the Gemara states clearly, is specifically Seta Kochavim. So that's great. But when Seta Kochavim? How much time is there, the time span between sunset and the 3 stars being seen? Now here in Harambam, in Ilchot Terumot, where he speaks about the Kohanim in this scenario, writes, V'zeh ha'et kemo shelish sha'a. This is about a third of an hour, ahar sheki'ah hahama, a third of an hour after the sun sets. So when we talk about what time is Vadai Laila according to Harambam, it's how much time after sunset? A third of an hour, 20 minutes. And so for Harambam, it seems to be that there's this fixed time. Now, this is highly debated throughout the poskim, throughout the rabbinic decisors, about which is the major factor. Is it that he writes here, that's really about 18 to 20 minutes after the sun sets, and there were some communities that would end Shabbat 25 minutes after Shabbat. I've heard rumors that there were those who ended 20. I believe them, I say rumors only because I've heard little bits here and there. 25 minutes I've heard more of. But here very clearly, Harambam says 20 minutes after sunset is Vadai Laila, absolutely 3 stars could be seen. But what if I can't see the 3 stars? Which factor plays the major role? And when is it that Shabbat is actually over? Or, for our case here, when can I actually say Shema and fulfill my obligation? And Harambam would be very clear here, either Seta Kochavim or 20 minutes after.